We're here at Chowderness on the south bank of the Humber Estuary, and I'm with Professor Mike Elliott of the Institute of Estuarine and Coastal Studies at the University of Hull. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, James.
Could you just explain a little bit about what this site represents and why it's here?
Yeah, this site is one of the few areas on the Humber what we call a managed realignment site. What that means is there's areas where we've pushed the coast back. And we've pushed the coast back for three reasons. One is to try and make up for any habitat that's lost due to developments on the Humber. And in this case, at Chowderness, it was to make up for some an extension to a port at Immingham. So the first one is habitats and the ecology. The second one is to do with the giving the Humber space for its water, if you like. The idea that if water keeps coming into estuaries, it keeps rising because we've got sea level rise, and in this area we've got the land sinking as well. So the water is rising, so the water's got to go somewhere. So we create areas for the water to go. So that means it gives us safety for humans. And the third thing is the economy. You know, if you could give the water somewhere to go, then it means you don't have to build the walls as high. Most of the Humber is got walls, sea walls around it, and because of sea level rise we would have to keep building those even higher.
So are there other sites like this that have been created on the Humber?
Yes, James, there were several of them. At the same time as Chowderness was created, there was one created down at Welwick, which is down towards Gibraltar Point, and they were both created for this port development at Immingham. There's one at Paul Homestrange, which was the first site that was created, and again that was created to try and give us some more habitat. But the biggest one is at Altborough, which is further up the estuary, at the where the Trent and the Ouse comes in. And Altborough is created really as a water storage site. So if there was a very high tide, or if this storm surges, or very high river flows, then the water has somewhere to go, and that's a big one. That's about 400 hectares or so. We're working over in Belgium on the Scheldt estuary, and there's a very large area there where they're doing it, and they're doing it in America, and we've done some work in South Africa on the same idea, creating habitats but also giving water somewhere to go to.
So given that sea levels will continue to rise, then this is a necessary and ongoing part of our response to this.
It is, but what we're also trying to do is make up for, let's call it the damage we've done in the past. Now, if you think about it, the Humber it's shrunk in size, what we call coastal squeeze. The reason why it's squeezed is because over the last few hundred years we've wanted areas for agriculture. And one of the easy ways of getting agricultural land is you see all these mud flats and think, well, if we just dry it out, we can grow crops on it. The problem with that is, and in the Humber we've used a lot of that. There's a lot of land gone. The problem with that is what you're doing is you're squeezing the estuary. And so if any water comes into the estuary then through tides, and we have things called tidal surges, and we can come back to that. If you squeeze the estuary, of course the water can only go upwards, and that gives us problems. So we're trying to make up for things we've been doing over the last 300 years or so on the Humber.
I can see an obvious problem with that is that if we push back the sea defences effectively, then we're going to lose agricultural land. Does this bring us into conflict with the farming community?
It does. I mean, if you think about it, James, over the last few years, agricultural land's been fairly cheap, so we could do these things. We could use agricultural land, turn it back to wetland, and we're still getting benefit from it, because we're still getting benefits in terms of safety for humans and lower sea walls, things like that. So we're still getting benefits, but not agricultural benefits. Where it's bringing conflicts now is because we now decide we would like agricultural land for crops, for biofuels. This is the big thing. Let's get crops to make energy, crops sort of thing. And so it now in the future might be a bit more difficult to do that, to lose agricultural land, turn it back into wetland. But the other major point is that, say, we need those wetlands to support the birds and the fish and so on. The wetlands on the Humber support, as you've seen, support huge numbers of wading birds, but they also support a lot of fish. You know, the juvenile fish that come in at this size that use those wetlands. So we need them to support those things.
Well, thanks very much for explaining something about the delicate balance of land use on the Humber, Mike.
It's a pleasure. Good to be here.
And now over to you, Sarah.
The Humber has a long history of flooding, and over the centuries these surges have changed the shape of the coastline. They've also had far-reaching consequences in the surrounding areas, in particular the infamous flood of '53, which caused damage on a mass scale. I'm here in Louth by the banks of the River Ludd, where in 1920 they had a huge flood which devastated the town despite being some 10 miles away from the coast. I'm here to meet a local historian whose book, The Lincolnshire Seaside, charts the history of the coast from the Humber down to the Wash. I'm here with David Robinson OBE, retired senior lecturer from University of Nottingham. Good afternoon, David.
Hello.
Thank you for seeing us. I wonder if you could take us through the history of the coastline of the Humber from its early origins.
Well, it's not just the Humber.
Okay.
It's the Lincolnshire coast, which stretches from the Humber down to the Wash. And this is a reconstruction map of mine of the Saxon shoreline, which shows nothing that you can recognise today. The black spot there is for Skegness, right. Just for something to go on. So you had the inland area, which was slightly higher than the rest, but all the rest was covered by the sea. But that was in Romano-British and Saxon times.
Yeah.
What was the coastline like when we went on to the 13th century? When we had a coastline which was like a bow, which went round from the Humber to the Wash, and Skegness was the Ness at one corner, and up in the north you had the villages like Falstow Marsh Chapel, Falstow Marsh it was called, and coming down to Saltfleet, and then the coastline was further out. And we lost 5 medieval churches in the period from the 13th century onwards, because 1271 was a period of a great surge which swept down the coast, and it left salt marshes to the north, developing salt marshes in the Wash, but the central part of the coastline was moved back. It was the beginning of a movement which is still going on. Right. But the paradox is that the coastline is being reclaimed north of Saltfleet and south of Skegness, and it's still going on. But in the early days of the salt marsh, they were grazed by sheep. Right. So the great flood of 1571, followed by the tidal surge which affected Boston right down in the corner of the Wash, drowned something like 10,000 sheep. Wow. Who were on the upper salt marsh. That's where the grasses grow, not the lower part of the salt marsh where samphire grows, but the upper part. And that was those two events really began to change the coastline, because in the bay of the Humber, when the Spurn Point shifted 3 times every 300 years or so, and down in the Wash, salt marsh developed to be quite wide. It wasn't until James I of England came to the throne that some of the villages up Marsh Chapel, at Grainthorpe, and so on, and Wainfleet down through Bennington and round to Lutton, they then decided to reclaim the salt marsh, right, rather than make salt, because he put an extra tax on salt in order to benefit the Scottish industry. But he allowed all this salt marsh reclamation at the biggest at Holbeach fingering up northwards as Gibraltar Point grew southwards from Skegness.
Right.
And in the middle, between Mablethorpe and Skegness, you've got these hard defences, concrete steps, rock armour, CBs. On the seaward side now you've got a massive amount of sand. When the then Lincolnshire Rivers Authority, the NRA rather, decided what to do in 1994, I said to them, once you've started you're not going to be able to stop.
With the defences?
Yeah, because what is happening is that not only is sea level rising with or without global warming, but the land is going down. The change has been about 1/2 a foot in my lifetime. Well, 1/2 a foot doesn't sound all that much, but it's about that much. And it's made a dramatic difference to the coastline.
Join us after the break, where James will be hearing about the estuary's flood defences and meeting a local character with a flood story of his own.
Without the network of flood defences that surround the Humber, land around the estuary would flood fairly regularly. But structures such as this, which is the flood defence barrier at Hull, mean that a lot of flooding can be prevented. This is basically a gate that can be lowered onto the bed of the river, and this prevents flood water from the estuary from entering the city of Hull. I'm off now to talk to someone who's a local expert on flooding to find out a little bit more. I'm here with Nick Cutts from the Institute of Estuary and Coastal Studies on the edge of the Humber, and we're going to be talking a little bit about flooding in estuaries. So thanks for joining us, Nick.
No problem, James.
Could you explain a little bit about why estuaries flood?
They're all very low lying. They basically move through their own floodplain. So there's a very significant potential flood risk for any of those. Unfortunately also estuaries are very important economically. Lots of people live on them, lots of industry. They're also used for navigation. So for that reason we have had to protect the hinterland, but also there is this very huge risk and a fairly important economic risk if they do flood. So we have to manage them. This is why in the Humber we've got the barrier on the Hull, because there's a potential there for the city of Hull to flood. It flooded a long time ago now, many moons ago when I was a child, and lots of premises in the old town flooded. The barrier is built and it's regularly used, and it stops catastrophic flooding occurring.
Obviously we had a tidal surge on December the 5th last year, which was an extreme event, but we can apparently look forward to more of these in the future because of climate change. I mean, how extreme are the flood risks that we face now?
Certainly the risk is increasing with climate change predictions, and we can expect more storminess occurring and more of these potential events. The one that occurred in early December was very close to overtopping this barrier, only by probably less than a foot. If it had been a coincidence of worse conditions, a higher tide, a tide occurring exactly at the right time of the surge, a slightly larger surge, most of this area of Hull could have been flooded.
Right, and so effectively you're saying that despite the massive investment in flood defences, this is just something that people who live on estuaries have to be prepared to deal with occasionally.
The flood that occurred, the surge that occurred in December was catastrophic for many people. Lots of houses and businesses flooded in East Riding, 200 houses or so, and certainly around the banks of the estuary. But it wasn't as bad as it could have been, and it certainly wasn't as bad as the 1953 flood, which was the last really big surge, which led to a loss of life of around 300 people in England. But in terms of flood risk, the Humber is probably second only to the Thames in terms of potential flood risk. So it's really essential that the management of the flood potential is taken forward, and we take into account these increasing risks occurring. It's just going to be very costly.
Could you just tell us a little bit about how the flooding might affect wildlife?
Well, certainly the surge in December did affect quite a bit of the wildlife of the estuary. In particular, the muds were changed and the animals that live in the mud. But It's important to emphasise that the estuary is a very dynamic system. It's used to having these sort of changes. There's these sort of fluctuations in current patterns and the mudflat erosion and deposition constantly changing. And the creatures that live here, the wildlife that lives on these, is well adapted to that sort of environment. So the estuary will recover. It'll recover far more quickly probably than people with flooded houses.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Nick.
My pleasure.
I've come to the village of South Ferriby on the south bank of the Humber, and we're at the home of Dave Mounsey, someone who arguably knows more about the Humber than anyone else alive, and an eel fisherman to boot. Can't wait to meet him.
Ah, hello Jane.
Nice to meet you, Dave.
Yeah, come on in.
Thanks very much. Wow, I heard you've been flooded. I can see from all the plaster off that it must have been quite serious here.
Yeah, 4'8".
4'8".
Yeah, up here.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah, one of them things, isn't it? Live again a river, it bites you.
And where were you when this actually happened?
Well, I was outside until it came across the field. It came across the field in a wave, about, I don't know, 18 inches high. We'd sandbagged the house, but that was pointless. It came straight in. This door was open, but sandbagged up half a metre. I came in the house to switch the power off. That door shut behind me, and I'm trapped in the kitchen for about 10 minutes with water coming up on the outside window, wondering whether the window's going to come in or not. Anyway, I eventually got through the door in to go upstairs, took the power off, got upstairs and looked out, and the youngest lad stood in the middle of the road up to his knees in water running past him in a pair of chest waders with all hell breaking loose.
And how many houses got flooded in South Ferriby?
About 133.
And it's not a particularly big village, is it?
No, it didn't. I mean Ferriby Sluice. It totally took out Ferriby Sluice.
So the water came over the cedar fences here, and then it just ran inland.
It ran inland. It went right the way in and shut down the Scunthorpe Grimsby railway line. Took out some of the signalling equipment, evidently.
And it was remarkable that no one drowned in this.
It was very, very remarkable. I know 3 people that got washed out of their houses.
Physically washed out of the houses through the doors.
One old guy sat there watching telly. His dog started to whine, and that's who opened the door to let the dog go out in the old people's bungalows opposite. Next thing, the front door came in and took him and his dog out and down the passage. If he hadn't got fast in a hawthorn hedge at back of Andrews Lane, I think he would have got drowned.
Well, it's a remarkably close escape, and you must have had other close escapes on the river in your time, I guess.
Yeah, I've been pulled out, been fast up to the river in the mud up to my waist when I was eel fishing. I mean, I spent, 15, 16 years as an eel fisherman on the river before I joined National Rivers Authority as it was then.
Well, I see you've got some of your eel-related stuff on the table for us. Can we have a look at some of this?
Yeah, of course can, yeah. Well, first of all, I best show you a net that we used to catch them with. This is a commercial way of catching them. 3-trap net. The eels follow the guide net, go in through the first trap. It's got an otter guard on, stop otters getting in, and big coarse fish, and then go through, end up coming through that final funnel. You undo the cod end and tip them out. And the nets aren't baited at all. You rely purely on eel movement and knowing what you know about eels.
So these lie on the bottom, and the eel just swims into it in the middle.
Yeah, an eel is a bottom feeding fish, but eels will not swim uphill into a net. Think about that. All your nets you've got to set so that the cod end is at the lowest part of the net.
Okay.
Okay, now that's one way. Now the other way is, this is an old-fashioned way called blobbing or clotting. You go out at night onto usually a cricket ground outfall, especially if it's been raining, and you collect dew worms or lob worms, which are the big worms. You get them, put them in a bucket, put them with fresh moss for about a week, fortnight, which they clean themselves and their skins go very leathery. You then thread them long ways on with a piece of wool, threaded through, thread them onto worsted wool, and we usually use 10 or 12 at a time. Make them into a loop, tie the loop to that lead weight, a line up to a bamboo cane, a carpet cane, then dangle it over the side of the boat in moving water, in tidal water, on the Humber side, and the eel swim along, grab the worm, and the fine teeth get fast in the wool. You lift them into the boat and shake them off. And you can catch 50, 60 pound on a good day.
Now, I know that in recent years, eel fishing has stopped completely on the Humber. Can you tell us a bit about why that's so?
When I did it, you got wet and dirty, and you got paid for your labours. I think some of it, in my view, is people, or your modern youth, don't want to get mucky and dirty and earn a decent living. It's maybe perhaps a lot easier to get money on benefits, I don't know. The other side of the coin is, a lot of people have said the Humber's dirty. It isn't. It's getting cleaner all the time.
That's true.
It's getting very, very clean. I mean, some of the bycatches, if you like what we get when I'm playing about with eels, get sole, Dover sole. You see the odd salmon, sea trout, not that many. Eels, of course, brown shrimp, sand goby, all sorts of stuff. And of course now we've got mitten crab in big numbers.
Yes, we've been hearing a lot about these.
Yeah, which is the Chinese mitten crab coming from China on in the same ballast tanks of big ship. It's quite a pest. The problem with mitten crabs is if there's any eels in the net, the mitten crab eat them. They'll eat everything in the net. But yeah, it's a lot richer than what people think. But to catch eels, it's fairly specialised, and I wasn't at that stage prepared, and I still aren't, to tell everybody the secrets of catching eels.
So there are a lot of secrets in this business.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, you're dealing with nature. There is eels have certain habits that you explore. I can look at a tide book now and tell you when silver eels will come down the Ancombe or down the Humber. Next year and the year after. Quite easy. I mean, my children, they can all catch eels and they know the habits. And there's certain secrets that I've made up out of day-to-day diaries that are plotted on graphs. And it just doesn't only apply to eels, James, it applies to smelt, lamprey. There's one or two fish that are out there in the Humber that you only need to look at certain times. And yeah, it's an old-fashioned craft. It won't die with me because my lad knows how to do it, so I'm quite happy, if you see what I mean.
Thanks for sharing that with us,
No,
if not all the secrets of the trade.
No, not a problem.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
If you'd like to find out more about any of the items on today's show, please go to www.estuary.tv/Our Estuary.